House of the Dragon has filled that Game of Thrones void that has been missing in me for the last 5 years, and honestly, I was really skeptical of whether or not I would like the show, mostly because I was pretty upset with how Game of Thrones ended, but I've actually really grown to love House of the Dragon, and it is something that I do think about pretty much every single day. I know it's a little silly, but I really do love the show. I mean, the story is essentially Game of Thrones, but civil war, and there's a lot more dragons involved. And it tells the story of a woman who is usurped by her younger brother, and it is told from the perspective of that woman, Rhaenyra, and also through the lens of her stepmother, Alicent Hightower, who is the mother of the brother who usurps his sister. And obviously that leads to a huge war, and there's lots of interfighting, and it's such a good story. Both Rhaenyra and Alicent are complex and strong in their own ways, and I love that the story is told from their perspective. And I know that they appear different in the book than in the show. I actually really like the way that they are portrayed in the show. I think that it gives them more complex dynamics, and I think that it makes it a little more interesting for the viewer. I do know how it all ends for them, but I do welcome any changes that the writers want to make, because I think that they have the ability to do something really cool with these characters. One thing that I do not love about the show is the discourse that happens around the two main characters, Rhaenyra and Alicent, specifically when it comes to them parenting their children. Both women have quite a few children, and it is easy to pass judgment as a viewer onto these women saying, you know, this one's a good mom, this one's a bad mom, but I think it goes a lot deeper than just these super reductionist feelings we have towards these characters. Of course, what inspired me to do this was the fan reaction to the end of season 2, episode 2, when Alicent does not comfort Aegon while he is clearly mourning the death of Jaehaerys. Super quickly after that came out, we saw a bunch of anti-Alicent stuff come out about how she's a horrible mother, about how she doesn't comfort her children, but I want to think a little deeper about it. There was a lot of comparisons to the way that Rhaenyra acted towards Jaehaerys after they were informed about Lucerys' death. The two of them had a nice, loving, familial moment, and we did not see that with Alicent and Aegon. And obviously, there are conclusions to be drawn about the way that those two interact. I just don't think that the fandom has come to the right conclusion. Alicent and Rhaenyra had very different upbringings, they have different support systems, and they honestly have different relationships with their children, and so comparing the two of them is not really fair. So today, that's what we're going to talk about. I'm only going to be talking about the show. We are not going to be talking about the books at all. We're only going to be talking about the way that the characters were written in the show, because there were changes made between the books and the shows that do impact the dynamics that they have with their children and with each other. And there will be spoilers for up to season 2, episode 3. By the way, I want it to be known before we go into it that I am in fact Team Black, okay? Rhaenyra can do no wrong, but I want to think a little bit deeper about Alicent's character. Because at the end of the day, one of my favorite things about Game of Thrones is their ability to turn unlikable characters into sometimes people you root for. The show begins when both the girls are pretty young and they are under the supervisions of their father. Let's start with Rhaenyra. When we're introduced to Rhaenyra, she is an only child and she is clearly loved by her mother and father, though she doesn't really feel that way because her dad is consistently wishing that he had a son to become the heir to the Iron Throne. Rhaenyra's mother dies during childbirth very early into the story, and that leaves the heir apparent to be Daemon, who is Viserys' brother. However, Daemon goes and calls the baby heir for a day, and that leads to Viserys removing him from his position and declaring Rhaenyra to be the heir to the Iron Throne. When Viserys talks to Rhaenyra about naming her heir, he apologizes to her profusely for the way that he had treated her in the past, saying that he wasted so much time not investing in her and just trying to have a son when he had an heir all along, and that was Rhaenyra. Viserys goes through many political hardships to try and ensure that Rhaenyra has the life that she desires and that she remains happy. He does not force her to get married right away. He allows her to study. He allows Rhaenyra to do what would make Rhaenyra happy, and also kind of prepare her for the duties of the throne. Viserys does become frustrated with Rhaenyra because he does orchestrate sort of a bachelorette in paradise situation at Storm's End for her to select a husband, which she does not do. When she returns to King's Landing, she is then caught canoodling with Daemon in a brothel. Obviously, this leads to some frustration on Viserys' end, and then it's only heightened by her actions with Daemon. Despite his frustration with Rhaenyra, Viserys does choose Rhaenyra in this situation. When Otto Hightower comes to tell him of Rhaenyra's canoodling, he then removes Otto Hightower from his position as hand. He ends up selecting Laenor Velaryon to become Rhaenyra's husband, which is, by all accounts, an excellent match for her, not only politically, but also somebody who is kind to her. And as we find out, Rhaenyra is actually happy with this setup because she does like Laenor. Viserys also worries a lot about what Rhaenyra will think when he has to remarry. It is important that he remarries because he's the king and he needs to strengthen his line, and Rhaenyra is very understanding of that. But he has a conversation with her before he selects who he will marry, and while it does come to a surprise to her that he chooses Alicent over Laena, he still has the conversation with her about him having to perform a duty and her accepting that. I believe that if Rhaenyra had said that she was not okay with it, Viserys would have never married again. Now let's compare that to Alicent. Alicent grew up in King's Landing. She is best friends with Rhaenyra. She has a mother who passed away many years before. Her main parental figure in her life is her father, Otto Hightower, and she also has a brother named Gwaine, who was in the first 2 episodes, and now he's back in the most recent season. Alicent is a faithful daughter who will do what her father wants her to do, and she will always work to progress her family's ambitions. Knowing this about his daughter, Otto Hightower uses Alicent as a pawn to further his political gain. After the death of Queen Aemma, Otto immediately sends Alicent to go and comfort the king. And with this, his end goal is essentially to have the king fall in love with Alicent and marry her. Otto Hightower's plan works, and 6 to 12 months later, it's kind of a little unclear, Alicent and Viserys get married. And this, of course, was a massive betrayal to Rhaenyra, who was not even aware that her best friend and her dad had been talking. In this scene, Alicent is clearly very nervous, and in the other scenes where she's interacting with Viserys or her father, she also appears to be very anxious about having to perform her duty. Alicent's demeanor and body language suggests that this is not something that she wants to be doing. It is instead something that her father is telling her to do. These two have very different experiences with their father, despite the fact that both of their mothers die pretty young. The way that their fathers approach them after the death of their mothers is very different. Viserys very clearly loves Rhaenyra from the start, but his love definitely grows after the death of Queen Aemma and Baelon. And Alicent's father may have loved her, but I think he knew the power of having a daughter of a marriageable age, and he wanted to use that to further his political agenda. Both girls are forced into arranged political marriages, but there is no denying that one of those marriages is simply better than the other. One has a favorable match, while the other has one that they have very little interest in. Now, when it comes to performing duty, the women had very different experiences. Rhaenyra's relationships and subsequent pregnancies were based on acts of love and passion, whereas Alicent's were based on force and uncomfortability. Prior to their marriage, Rhaenyra and Laenor decided that the two of them would dine as they see fit. Essentially, the agreement is that since Laenor is gay, he is allowed to pursue his relationships with men, and Rhaenyra is allowed to pursue her relationships with men. But when it comes to having children, the two of them would work together to have children. Unfortunately, this was very difficult for the two of them, as you might assume. But given that producing heirs was a part of Rhaenyra's duty, she did seek out intimacy with Sir Harwin Strong. Rhaenyra and Harwin have 3 children together, Jacaerys, Lucerys, and Joffrey, and all 3 of the children are given the last name Velaryon, despite the fact that they are not Laenor's children. Laenor does not have a problem with this because he knows he can't perform his duty appropriately, but he does not really take an active role in his children's lives the way that Harwin does, which leads to a bunch of drama. After the death of Harwin Strong and Laena Velaryon, Daemon and Rhaenyra are united on Driftmark, and they end up pursuing a relationship with one another. In order to marry, Laenor needed to die, so they helped fake Laenor's death, and then they ended up getting married shortly after. By that point, Daemon had 2 children of his own, Baela and Rhaena, and so that led to a total of 5 children. Daemon and Rhaenyra went on to have 3 children of their own, Aegon, Viserys, and Visenya, who was stillborn. Rhaenyra ends up with 7 children, and there is only one instance in this show where we see Rhaenyra quarrel with one of the father of her children. This is when Laenor names Joffrey without Rhaenyra's consent. On the other hand, Alicent's marriage was completely planned by her father with the sole purpose of her producing hopefully male heirs that would go on to usurp Rhaenyra. Alicent and Viserys end up having 4 children together, Aegon II, Helaena, Aemond, and Daeron. And it is very clear from the moment that Alicent is married to Viserys that her duty performing with Viserys is not a consensual act. There is a scene very early on into the series where we see Alicent being called into the bedchambers of Viserys, and we are then shown a scene of her looking up while he's acting on her, and she is very clearly bored and disgusted with the action. In this instance, Alicent does remind me a little bit of Cersei, but the difference being that Alicent doesn't have a Jaime to come and bring her tea after she is laid with Viserys. And I don't think Alicent would take a tea even if it was offered to her, because she does want to perform her duty to her father the best that she can. Alicent only ever did what she believed would be in the best interest of her family, and that is furthering her father's political agenda. So Alicent sacrifices her life and her body in order to produce 4 heirs for Viserys. The way that these two women come into parenthood is very different. Rhaenyra is able to choose when she has a child and with who. This is something that she is able to have almost complete control over. I'm not going to say total control because I don't think they could really plan pregnancies back then, if you know what I mean. But she had a lot of choice in when these things happened to her and with who and in what circumstance. For Rhaenyra, her children came out of a place of love and pleasure. Alicent obviously did not have that same experience. Alicent was forced to have children with a man that she was not attracted to, and though I do believe she grew to love him, his actions towards her are assault. Her children are conceived in an act of pain and guilt, and this is what kind of influences her child rearing altogether. There is one scene in this show that I think not only captivates the entire theme of the show, but best demonstrates the difference in child rearing between Rhaenyra and Alicent. After the death of Laena, Vhagar is able to be claimed, and he is claimed by Aemond Targaryen. When he returns from his first flight with Vhagar, he is greeted by Baela, Rhaena, Jacaerys, and Lucerys. Rhaena is very upset because she thought she had a claim to Vhagar since it was her mother's dragon, but Aemond claimed her first. Rhaena attempts to attack Aemond, but Aemond attacks back, and this leads to a massive brawl between all of the cousins. Aemond ends up losing an eye after Lucerys stabs him in the eye, defending his brother. When all the adults are present and Viserys tells them all to knock it off, Alicent is not happy with this answer and chooses to take matters into her own hands. She decides she's going to take the eye of Lucerys and tries to attack him. Rhaenyra puts herself in front of her children to protect Lucerys and literally is like hand to hand with Alicent. This is one of my favorite scenes in the entire show. I think it's most people's favorite scene in the entire show so far because it is such a powerful scene. Rhaenyra tells Alicent that now they see her as she is, and it is true. Now they will always see Alicent as somebody who is rash and brutal and is not looking out for the best interest of everybody around, and can't really do anything to protect her children because she is told to stand down by her father and the king and everybody else around her. On the other hand, Rhaenyra is seen as strong as she literally put herself in front of a blade for her children. Rhaenyra's children love her, not only her biological children, but also her 2 stepchildren. Baela is taken to ward by Rhaenys, and even though she is gone for a long period of time with a woman who believes that Rhaenyra had a say in the death of her son, Baela still loves Rhaenyra and is still willing to do things for Rhaenyra. Lucerys best summarizes the children's feelings towards Rhaenyra when he calls her perfect. And I think that this is because Rhaenyra's devotion to her children is very clear. As I've already mentioned, after the eye for an eye incident on Driftmark, all of her children see her as somebody strong, willing to protect them. I mean, she literally suffers a massive blow to the arm to save them. When Vaemond Velaryon tries to challenge Lucerys' claim to Driftmark, she also stands up for her children then too. So not only does she literally stand up for them in a protection sense, but also in a protection of their status sense. Rhaenyra also proposes a marriage between Jacaerys and Helaena, who is her sister / Alicent Hightower's daughter. This marriage between Helaena and Jacaerys would have been an act of love for Rhaenyra because that marriage would have been something where there wouldn't have been a lot of struggle. There wouldn't have been a lot of negative feelings or interactions. It just would have been, I think, a very I think it would have been a good fit. We could see that when they do their little dance together. When Alicent demands to see Joffrey right after Rhaenyra births him, she actually takes Joffrey up herself rather than giving him to a handmaiden. And when Jacaerys finds out that Harwin Strong is his father, she does take the time to comfort him. Her devotion to her children leads to them respecting her not only as their mother, but also as their queen. But most of their love comes from the motherly aspect of Rhaenyra, not from the queen aspect. When it comes to actually parenting her children, she is met with very little resistance from any of the men in her life. Laenor, Daemon, Viserys, none of those men try to instill any sort of beliefs on her children that undermine Rhaenyra. Essentially, Rhaenyra is able to raise her children in the way that she sees fit. Daemon undermines Rhaenyra a lot, but he never does it when it comes to their children. He does attempt to get Jacaerys to act right after Rhaenyra's crown is usurped, but Jacaerys refuses to do so because he cares and loves for his mother/queen. Alicent, like most mothers, does love her children, but her children do not respect her. After the eye for an eye incident, Alicent's image suffers a massive blow with her children. No longer do they see Alicent as somebody who will protect them, they instead see her as somebody weak who literally cannot do anything to ensure justice will be served for her children. They see her as an emotional woman who will act on impulse. Her general weakness with her children is one of the biggest battles Alicent faces throughout the entire show. Alicent is consistently undermined by the men in this show. After all the children give Aemond a pig, he is very upset about it. He goes to see Alicent, and Alicent is then talking with the king, who tells her that kids are just being kids and to just let him be bullied. Essentially. When Alicent acts out to try and avenge Aemond after he loses his eye, she tries to have Criston Cole avenge Aemond by taking Lucerys' eye. But Criston Cole refuses to do so, as he is only her sworn protector and not under her actual command. So she attempts to take things into her own hands, which, as we've already discussed, ends negatively for her. While this is clearly not the right course of action that somebody should have been taking, it does demonstrate her lack of power in the situation. Her children now see her as weak, as she cannot command somebody to avenge her, and she cannot seek out vengeance on her own. When Viserys dies, Otto and Alicent have a competition of sorts to see who can get to Aegon first. Alicent really wants Aegon to ensure that Rhaenyra can live and will not kill her, whereas Otto says that Rhaenyra needs to die in order to strengthen Aegon's claim. Otto knows this about Alicent, yet he is still attempting to go and undermine her in front of her children, specifically her child, who is now going to be the king. When Viserys is not taking petitions, Vaemond uses this as a time to go to King's Landing to advocate that Lucerys should not be the heir to Driftmark. Alicent and Otto do plan to uphold this claim, as it is very clear that Lucerys is not the biological child of Laenor. Her position is well known by her children, as established also in the eye for an eye situation, where it is very clear that Aemond heard that Rhaenyra's children are bastards from Alicent, even though he blames Aegon. And while everybody's gathered at court, Viserys does appear and tells everybody that he is strengthening Rhaenyra's claim, allowing Lucerys to remain the heir of Driftmark. After Aegon is made king, they have a small council meeting where they talk about the ways that they could take over the North and the Vale. Alicent suggests taking a path of non-violence, but Aegon goes directly against her wishes, saying that violence is the only answer, demonstrating his unwillingness to listen to his mother based off of her perceived weakness. Otto also tells Alicent in front of all of the small council to not harp on what happened with Lucerys and Aemond, as it is not productive. That is just another way that he is undermining her in front of her children, because obviously her king, her son, is the main person in that room. Alicent attempts to show love to her children, but she really struggles to do so. There are two ways that she does this in the show. There's the political way, and then there's the more familial way. When she acts in a political way, she is acting more how she perceives love from her own father. After Aegon assaults one of the maids in the house, she provides that maid with money and some tea to get her out of the castle and to prevent any unwanted consequences of her actions with Aegon. On her way to Aegon's coronation, she and Aegon are in the carriage together, and they were having a conversation about what Viserys' end goal was. Did he really want Aegon in there? And she presents Aegon with the sword. Alicent tries to approach this with love, but there is a very strong political end to the way that she is talking to him. At one point in time, Alicent does grab Aegon and tell him that one day he will be king and Rhaenyra's children will come for him as they are a threat. She is, of course, projecting everything that her father has ever told her to Aegon, and the way that she interacts with him is in a violent manner. You know, she does grab him, but that is essentially what Otto has done with her. At times, Alicent does act more motherly in the traditional sense. When her children are babies, she tries to comfort them, but in every scene where she is comforting one of her children, the baby is crying. The baby does not really want to sit on her lap or be around her. She does place herself between Aegon and Meleys, meaning that if Meleys had actually killed them, Alicent would have burned for her child. Alicent also shows a lot of sympathy towards Helaena. I think Alicent has more affection towards Helaena than her sons, mostly because she sees a little bit of herself in her daughter. I think it's similar to how Cersei saw herself in her daughter as well. In the most recent episode, she goes to see Helaena, and Helaena tells her that she forgives her for her actions, which there's a lot to be said about what is Helaena forgiving her for. But at the end of it all, Alicent is not supported at all by her partner. She is consistently steamrolled and overlooked by those in her life who help her raise her children. Any hopes and dreams that Alicent had for her children does not matter. Anything that she had hoped to get out of parenthood does not matter, because at the end of the day, Alicent's duty was to produce children and heirs and not to raise them. While I do agree that Alicent should have consoled Aegon at the end of it all, I do see why she would not have done so. Aegon is violent, we have seen that in the past, and we also know how he acts when he is drunk. She also obviously doesn't want him asking about her whereabouts. But I think that this goes to the deeper truth that Alicent doesn't really know how to parent her children appropriately and really struggles with parenthood. She tries to do what's best, but she really struggles with figuring out what that is. And it's not because she doesn't want to do it, it's because she literally does not know how. Alicent may be a bad mom, but it is not as simple as her just saying she doesn't care about her children. She is a victim of her circumstance. She has been steamrolled by her father and Viserys her entire life. Alicent had interests of her own at the beginning, and she was very good friends with Rhaenyra, but she was forced to play a game that she did not want to play. One thing I love about Game of Thrones / House of the Dragon is the complexity of these characters, and even though I am thoroughly Team Rhaenyra, I can't help but feel some sympathy towards Alicent. Alicent is just a scared little girl stuck inside of a woman's body. Thank you guys all so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Real quick shout out to my brother Colin for editing this video and going through all of my points with me to make sure that I was making sense, because at times I felt like a crazy person. If you have anything that you want to contribute to this discussion, please leave it in the comments down below, and I'll see you all next time. Bye!